You feel it most in the small silences. The moment after you lock the front door. The 5 seconds while the coffee brews. That brief pause between one episode and the next when the screen goes black for just a moment too long. Something rushes in to fill that space. It is not peace. It is a low, humming vigilance, a readiness you never asked for. Your jaw is tight again. Your shoulders have crept upward without your permission. And the strange part is that there is nothing actually wrong right now. The inbox is quiet. Nobody is calling. The evening is yours. Yet your body is braced as if you are waiting for a sudden noise in the dark. You try to take a deep breath, and it catches halfway up your chest, as if your lungs have forgotten how to find the bottom of themselves.
You tell yourself to relax, but the command itself feels like another item on an invisible to-do list that never gets shorter. This is not restlessness in the usual sense. It is not boredom. It is a very specific kind of exhaustion that lives underneath the surface of everything. It is the feeling of being tired but wired. You might lie down in bed and feel the weight of the day finally settle, but your mind does not follow. It starts scanning. It reviews conversations you had 3 years ago. It suddenly remembers you need to schedule a dentist appointment. It wonders if you sounded weird in that email you sent at noon. The body is horizontal, but the brain is still climbing stairs. And because there is no visible emergency to point to, no fire to put out, you start to wonder if the problem is just you. Maybe you were just high-strung. Maybe you lack discipline. Maybe if you just tried harder at relaxing, it would work. But the more you try to force calm, the more elusive it becomes. It is like trying to smooth water with your hand. Over time, this state stops being a temporary mood and starts becoming a description of who you think you are.
You become the person who cannot just sit still. You become the one who apologizes for needing to do something with their hands. You develop a reputation for being productive, for being on top of things, and you almost believe that this is a strength. But inside, there is a quiet grief. A grief for the version of you that could sit on a porch and just watch the light change without feeling guilty. This constant, low-level vigilance begins to shape your decisions. You choose the noisy restaurant over the quiet one, because the quiet one leaves you alone with your thoughts. You keep one earbud in, even when nothing is playing, just to have a barrier. You scroll, not because you are looking for something interesting, but because stopping the scroll feels like falling. It affects your relationships, too. Someone asks what you are thinking about, and you say nothing. But that is a lie. You are thinking about 7 things layered on top of each other, and none of them matter, but you cannot turn down the volume. It affects your self-talk. You call yourself a mess. You call yourself anxious.
You start to believe there is a factory defect in your wiring. But what if this is not a defect at all? What if this is actually a perfectly logical response from a brain that is doing exactly what it evolved to do, just in an environment it was never designed for? You are not broken. The fact that you cannot relax even when the world is quiet does not mean you are failing at being human. It means your threat detection system is working overtime in a world that has replaced saber-toothed tigers with unread emails and vague financial futures. The part of your brain that keeps you on edge is the same part that kept your ancestors alive when the grass rustled. It is not a flaw of character. It is a mismatch of context. You are running ancient software on modern hardware, and the updates have not caught up to the speed of the culture around you.
To understand why your foot shakes under the table when you are trying to read a book, we have to look at the very specific structure in the brain called the default mode network. When you are focused on a task, your brain lights up in a pattern called the task positive network. That is the you that writes the report, chops the onion, or follows the plot of the movie. But the second you stop doing, The brain does not stop working. It just switches networks. It hands the microphone to the default mode network. This is the network responsible for self-referential thought, memory consolidation, and planning for the future. It is the voice that says, "Remember that awkward thing you did in 2012? Or what if you lose your job next year?" For many people, this is just daydreaming or gentle planning. But for those who have spent a lifetime in environments that demanded hypervigilance, whether that was a chaotic childhood home, a high-stakes career, or simply a culture that rewards constant productivity,
The default mode network is not a quiet librarian. It is a drill sergeant. The mechanism is this. When the brain detects a lack of external stimulation, it tries to generate internal stimulation to keep you safe. It scans your memory for threats. It projects those threats into the future. And then it releases a small, almost imperceptible drip of cortisol. That drip is enough to keep you from sinking into the chair. It keeps you hovering just above the surface of rest. Think of your nervous system like a smoke detector in a house. A well-functioning smoke detector goes off when there is actual smoke. But a hypersensitive one goes off when you burn the toast. And a traumatized one goes off when you just open the oven door and a puff of warm air hits it. Right now, you are living in a house where the alarm chirps every time you try to read a book or close your eyes. The alarm is not lying. It is detecting something. It is detecting the absence of distraction.
And to a brain that has learned to equate stillness with danger, that absence is a threat. The mental model here is simple. The brain fears the void. When the external world goes quiet, the internal world gets loud. You cannot relax because relaxing feels like letting go of the steering wheel while the car is still moving. And your brain, in its misguided but earnest attempt to keep you safe, refuses to let you take your hands off the wheel. The question then becomes not how to fix your broken brain, but how to teach this very old, very protective part of you that it is safe to take your foot off the gas. So where do we start? You have already tried forcing yourself to relax. You have tried telling yourself to calm down. That is like telling the smoke alarm to stop beeping while the toast is still smoldering. The brain needs a different kind of signal. We need to work with the architecture of the mind, not against it.
There is a framework for this, a way of moving that is gentle enough not to trigger the alarm and deliberate enough to actually change the pattern. It involves 5 shifts in how you approach the quiet moments. The first shift is to offer the brain a handrail instead of pushing it off a cliff. The principle here is called allostatic accommodation. When you go from 60 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour, the nervous system panics because the change in velocity is too abrupt. It interprets the sudden stop as a crash. So instead of trying to go straight from work mode to meditation cushion, you need to give your brain a low-stakes, low-focus task to bridge the gap. This is why you can sit and listen to a podcast while folding laundry for an hour, but cannot sit and listen to your own breathing for 30 seconds. The podcast and the laundry are handrails. They keep the default mode network just busy enough so it does not start screaming.
Psychologically, this works because it engages the dorsal attention network without activating the stress response. You're providing the brain with just enough sensory input to feel like it is still doing its job of monitoring the environment. And what does this look like in real life? Instead of deciding to sit in silence, you decide to sit with a cup of tea and just feel the warmth of the ceramic in your palms. You are not meditating. You are not doing nothing. You are feeling the heat. That is a job. That is a handrail. The brain can say, okay, we are monitoring the temperature. We are safe. We are not floating in the void. The second shift involves how you breathe, but not in the way you think. The advice to take a deep breath is so common it has become white noise. But the mechanism only works if you understand the exhale. The sympathetic nervous system, the gas pedal, is linked to the inhale. When you breathe in, your heart rate slightly accelerates.
That is why a sudden gasp is part of a startle response. The parasympathetic nervous system, the brake, is linked to the exhale. When you breathe out slowly, you activate the vagus nerve, which sends a signal directly to the heart saying, "Slow down, everything is okay." Most people who cannot relax are chest breathers. They take short, sharp sips of air as if they are running from something. The practice here is called vagal toning via extended exhalation. What you do is simple. You breathe in for a count of 4, but you breathe out for a count of 6 or 8. That longer exhale is the key. It is the biological override switch for the alarm. And why does this work in the brain? Because the vagus nerve is a two-way street. It connects the brain to the gut and the heart. When you force the exhale to be long and slow, you are physically telling the brain, "I have the time to let this air out. If a predator were chasing me, I would not be exhaling this slowly. Therefore, there is no predator." Here is the real-life example. You are sitting at a red light. You feel that familiar clench in your stomach. You have nowhere to go for 60 seconds. Instead of grabbing your phone, you just let the air out of your mouth like you are blowing on a spoonful of hot soup. You do that 3 times. The light turns green, but the edge has been taken off. The brain has received the memo. The third shift is about giving the restlessness a name and a shape. In psychology, this is called affect labeling. Research shows that when you put words to a feeling, the activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm bell, actually decreases. It is a phenomenon known as name it to tame it. But the nuance here is that you cannot just say, "I am anxious." That is too broad and too familiar. The brain will just nod and say, "Yes, we know. Keep scanning." You have to get granular. You have to describe the sensation with curiosity instead of judgment. You do not ask, "Why do I feel this way?" That leads down a rabbit hole of rumination. You ask, "How do I feel this way?" Where is the tension? Is it a cold wire pulling behind the eyes? Is it a hot brick in the center of the chest? Is it a buzzing in the limbs that feels like they want to run? This works because it shifts the brain from the emotional center of the limbic system to the observational center of the prefrontal cortex. You are no longer the one drowning in the river. You are the one standing on the bank, watching the water flow. You stop being the feeling, and you become the one noticing the feeling. An example. You are lying in bed at midnight, wide awake. The mind is churning. Instead of fighting it, you whisper to yourself in the dark, "There is a tight band around my forehead. My toes are curled. My breath is shallow like a rabbit's." You have just named the terrain. And when the terrain is mapped, it becomes less terrifying. It is just a landscape. It is not you. The fourth shift is a hard truth about the modern world. Sometimes the reason you cannot relax is that you have not given your body permission to complete the stress cycle. In neuroscience, stress is not just a thought, it is a chemical event. Cortisol and adrenaline are in your bloodstream. They do not just evaporate because you put on sweatpants. They need to be metabolized. You have to shake them out. This is why you feel that twitch, that urge to pace, that compulsion to click the pen. Your body is trying to finish the physical act of survival that the brain started.
The practice here is called somatic completion. What you do is this. When you feel that humming, trapped energy, you need to physically discharge it for about 20 to 60 seconds. You can stand up and shake your hands violently, as if you just washed them and there was no towel. You can push against a wall with all your strength for 10 seconds and then release. You can tense every muscle in your body, squeeze your eyes shut, hold your breath, and then let it all go with a heavy sigh. Why this works is because it signals to the amygdala that the action has been taken. The brain thinks, we shook, we pushed, we escaped. The body is moving. The threat must be over.
the loop closes. The real-life example is this. Before you try to sit down to rest, walk to the bathroom and just run your hands under cold water for 30 seconds while breathing out hard through your mouth.
It is a reset. It is a full stop to the sentence that was running on and on. The fifth shift is perhaps the most counterintuitive. It is about redefining the goal itself. You have been trying to relax as if it were a state of zero, as if it were the absence of noise, the absence of thought, the absence of movement. But that is a dead thing. True rest is not a void. It is a low hum. The psychology here draws on acceptance and commitment therapy. The goal is not to get rid of the anxious voice. The goal is to turn down its volume and give it a cookie so it will sit quietly in the corner. Trying to achieve a perfectly blank mind is a surefire way to guarantee failure because the mind does not do blank. It does not know how. What you are actually looking for is a state of gentle, undemanding focus. It is the state of watching the light move on the wall.
The thought comes up, I should be doing something. And instead of believing it, you just notice it. You say to yourself, there is that thought again. Interesting. And you go back to watching the light. The change in the brain is this. You are strengthening the neural pathways that allow you to observe thoughts without engaging them. You are building a muscle of detachment. It works because you stop feeding the fire of the default mode network. When a thought demands a reaction and you just shrug, the thought gets quieter. It loses its power because you have stopped giving it the one thing it craves, which is your belief in its urgency. For example, you are sitting on the couch, doing nothing. The thought arrives. You are wasting time. Instead of jumping up or feeling guilty, you just think, maybe I am. And you stay seated. That maybe is a shield. It is the difference between being yanked by a leash and holding the leash loosely in your hand.
All of this comes together into one simple visual model that you can carry with you. It is the image of a cup of tea on a train. You are the cup. The thoughts and the restlessness are the vibration of the train moving over the tracks. You have spent your life believing that you must stop the train to stop the shaking. You have been trying to reach the emergency brake. But trains do not stop. That is not what they do. The work is not to stop the train. The work is to become a cup that can hold liquid without spilling, even when the train is moving. You do not need to silence the world. You do not need to fix the wiring in your head. You just need to deepen the seat of your own presence. When the vibration comes, you let it pass through the porcelain of your body without shattering. You are not a calm person.
You are a person learning the impossible art of holding steady while the landscape blurs by the window. And as you sit with that image, you might notice something has shifted. Not a huge cinematic change, just a small one. The light in the room seems a little softer. The sound of the refrigerator humming no longer feels like an accusation. You are still here. The thoughts are still here. But there is a little more space between you and them. That space is what you have been looking for all along. It was never about making the noise stop. It was about realizing that you are not the noise. You are the one who hears it. And for now, for this one moment, that is enough. That is all it ever needed to be.